Fact. Hello everyone, thank you for deciding to spend some of your evening with us as we delve into memories of life in Glasgow and more widely Scotland, within a timeline ranging from post-World War II to recent years through discussion and storytelling. We will be able to trace this network of memories thanks to the insight of our two wonderful Glaswegian guests, Ringwood writers Simon McClean and John Keeman. Simon McClean is the author of The 10%, described as an often hilarious, sometimes scary, always fascinating journey through the ranks of the Scottish police, retracing Simon's career from constable in Argyll to holding a position in Rothesay and his final goal of joining the Serious Crime Squad in Glasgow. Our second guest, John Keeman, has published two books with Ringwood, The Italian Connection, a mystery novel involving spiritualism, reincarnation, and a serial killer, and In the Shadow of the Crane, which has been praised as a detailed snapshot of old Glasgow, a grounded memoir, and a discerning stance against injustice. I will send a link to all this book in the event chat if you want to take a look, maybe buy them. And tonight, I will also have a special co-host who is just as knowledgeable about Glasgow as John and Simon. I'm talking about Sandy Jamieson, Ringwood's Chief Executive Officer and the author of 6 books, including the recently republished novel, A Subtle Sadness. And I will now give a bit of an event outline so you know what lies ahead. And we'll begin by chatting with John and Simon about their background and maybe the writing process for The 10%, In the Shadow of the Crane, and The Italian Connection. Then we'll proceed by engaging in general discussion about the old Glasgow days, focusing on a variety of topics such as education, housing, football, employment, crime, sectarianism, and the entertainment scene. So that's quite a lot of things we're going to be talking about. And then we'll hear some fun and horrific stories from The 10% and In the Shadow of the Crane, which should also be fun. And afterwards, Simon will introduce us to his friend Jim Purvis from the amazing Sporting Memories Foundation to briefly talk about the foundation's work. And we will conclude with John and Simon replying to questions from the audience. You're encouraged to send in any query you might have, either via the Facebook live stream or the Zoom event chat box. And I think we can now get started. And so I'll start with you, John. How are you today?
Fine.
That's lovely. Okay, let's get on with it. Having published both The Italian Connection and The Shadow of the Crane with Ringwood, could you please tell us more about your writing process for each work? And do you think writing fiction was more challenging for you than writing about your own life?
Well, I know that some people write more than one autobiography, which I have a problem understanding. But I think if you have got diaries and documents and stuff like that, and other people's memories, an autobiography is much simpler to write, I think, is within the scope of everybody, really. Usually it's chronological, so the date of marriages and births and all that. So your research is basically in your head and it's already there, and it's in these things that other people remember. I mean, when I was writing The Shadow of the Crane, I had a friend of mine kept sending me things I forgot about myself, and I began to think that he was actually me, you know, because he seemed to know more about me than I did at the time. But I think the truth is that fiction is much more difficult. It requires you to have an imagination, and it's simple in the sense that you don't have to check facts, really. I mean, you know, although people like Frederick Forsyth definitely check facts, you know, but
John,
we think, yes.
I went about it slightly differently, because very consciously as well, when I decided to do the memoir, The 10%. And I realised very quickly that if I was going to fact check it, I was going to get 10 different answers to every situation, because everybody had a different remembrance of it and different take on it and a different idea of it. And I decided very quickly that this was, and it says it at the start, that it's something like the truth. It's actually Simon McClean's remembrance of it.
Yeah, sure.
It's not factual. Somebody else would write the same book about the same thing and have a different
book. You know what I mean?
So I never fact checked it or used a diary or used anything other than stuff like the Lisbon Lions, what date they won the European Cup, which came out wrong in the final analysis.
Oh no. Yeah. So I think fiction is much more difficult to write, and it's a very competitive sort of market, you know. I mean, almost everybody's written a book about spies and murderers and serial killers. So I think if you can get a good idea and express it well, then fine. But I think it's the most difficult of the two, the most challenging.
I still think it is rather challenging to write a memoir in a way that engages readers as if it were a novel, maybe. And you both did it quite well. So, yeah. And
quite well.
Very well. In a marvelous way.
That's as much as you'll get off of Emanuela.
I'll tell you another thing, Emanuela, about doing the 10%. Sandy said to me right at the outset, just write down some of these stories. So there was no timeline to it. Some of the stories were quite recent, towards the end of my career, and some of them were way back in the beginning in 1970s. But I sent them to Sandy, and he was absolutely right. It's the only time I've known that to occur, of course. But eventually, through the process of doing that, the structure of the book showed itself to me and became obvious how I was going to tie it all together at the end of the day. So the lesson for anybody is just get it down. Because nobody else.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with that. There's too much time spent worrying about what you're going to write. You can throw it away when it doesn't work, you know. But you can't. I mean, I had a colleague at work who I'd done a team sort of. He's writing about what his team member was like, and I wrote about this particular individual. She's a writer. The only thing is she hasn't written anything yet, you know.
Okay, Simon, we'll talk about the content of your book a little later on, but could you start us off by telling us a little about how you moved on from having a full career as a policeman to developing a new career of a writer? What was that about? How did it happen and why did you do it?
Well, you're integral to that, Sandy. And I don't know whether that's positive or a negative. But I'm not sure if you remember, but I had a friend, Magnus Maweta, who was a car dealer, for want of a better expression. I need to put inverted commas around that, because he was kind of a rascal. And I knew him because of my dealings with the drug squad and the crime squad back in the day. So he was kind of Arthur Daly type. He was always in that grey area. But through Ringwood, he was writing a book, or rather you were having it written for him from his stories and from his memories, because he was a very interesting guy, like most of these people are. And unfortunately, he died. And I had been doing the foreword for his book. I had promised him that I would do the foreword. And you and I got together for a half-hour coffee down in Partick, or Broomhill, Thornwood even, to discuss if we could finish Magnus's book. You remember?
You keep spreading this lie that suits your good image that we met in a cafe. It was a pub with good, honest alcohol. And anyone who knows us both will know that I'm telling the truth, not you.
Sounds like it's
interesting.
One in Partick and one in Thornwood.
Aye.
Sandy, it had a door which members of the public could come in and out. So it wasn't the type of drinking establishment I'm used to, I can assure you.
No. No sawdust on the floor, but it's interesting. You and Magnus Maweta are two different ends of publishers' dreams and nightmares. I knew Magnus had a fantastic story to tell, and that it would be a great book. And we even got a great title for it. He was one of the first sort of African immigrants to Glasgow, and he was a very good footballer. And the title was Young, Gifted, Black and Scottish, which would have been a good title. But as you say, despite us putting in a lot of work in it, there were two major problems. One, Magnus wouldn't know or recognise the truth if you told him it. And the other was that he didn't live long enough for us to help him reinvent it. But on the other hand, you're a dream come true. We started off with a concept and a mischievous gleam in your eye, and through hard work on your part and then hard work on Ringwood's part, that mischievous gleam's turned into an absolutely marvellous book. And it was Ringwood's bestseller by far in 2020. So you're a bit of a publisher's dream come true, and I
Sandy, suppose
you get called that every day.
All the time, aye. Everybody's dream. Sandy, I've not even launched it yet. I'm planning a whole new lodge.
Good, good.
Now that I can get out.
Okay, over back to Emanuela then.
Let's go back to John. So in the introduction of In the Shadow of the Crane, which we will be focusing upon more closely than the Italian connection because it has a stronger reminiscing element, you state that it took you quite a long time to decide you would write an autobiography. And I was just wondering, how did you end up realizing you wanted to work on one in the end?
Well, I was always opposed to the idea of writing an autobiography. And I had the idea that it was only really those and such as those who should write that sort of stuff. Well, Sandy's partly responsible for this because he said to me, he asked me once in his usual way, if our stories you tell true, you know, and I said, of course they're true, you know. So I think he thought I made most of my stories up, and then I began to think maybe it would be something the family might think was okay. So I had a go at it. I mean, I had plenty of stuff, plenty of material to write stuff. I just tried to put it into sort of 10-year chunks, you know, when I was writing it. And that was the idea in the head. That gave me 7 big lumps of material. So for my schooling through university and all the rest of it. So I decided it wasn't such a bad idea after all.
Absolutely, no, I think it was a great idea.
I was aware that many famous writers would never write an autobiography. I mean, you know, they just thought it was self-indulgent trite. But then again, that's people's opinion, you're entitled to it.
Yeah. I think it's important to say to people that there's a Glasgow tradition of autobiographies, which is couthy and pocky and sentimental. Your Molly Weirs and your Cliff Hanleys and your Jack Houses, the good old days, and everybody was a great neighbour and everything.
You know, as Billy Connolly said, that you could leave your door open in the days, but the only reason why you could was you had nothing for anybody to steal. So these sort of writings about how brilliant Glasgow was and how it was marvellous to stay in a house that had no inside toilet, no bath, you know. And I mean, it's just trite to me. I don't know how you can live through that and come out at the end of it writing that sort of nonsense. But then again, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, but John has expressed more pithily than I would have done that his book doesn't belong in that genre. It's almost unique in a frank look at life in Glasgow and the good bits and the bad bits. So we would urge everybody who hasn't bought it yet to go and get it.
For sure. The thing about the memoir that I found very valuable since doing it, because the experience having done it and it's been published has been 100 times more profound than actually writing the book was. That was nothing compared with what's happened since and the ripples that it's had in so many different aspects of my life. But the biggest one has been that it's a record. It's a record of a period in life in the police, in Glasgow, and between Rangers and Celtic and all that stuff. It's a physical record and it's a real legacy for my family. I'm doing my research just now into my family tree. I met a cousin last week in Helensburgh, and it's fascinating. But I wish I had a resource like that my granddad or my great-granddad had written a book. Wow.
Well, I wrote a play about my grandfather. When I was looking back at my family, I didn't realise my grandfather was a carter with black and white whiskey, and he was a morose man, you know. But then I found out he'd been in the machine gun corps in World War I, you know, and I thought, well, no wonder he was morose, you know. Yeah. And but that was very interesting, researching his records. And I wrote in the play that he spent the first 3 years of the war fighting with the Germans, and the second 3 years fighting with the British. Yeah. He was court-martialed 6 times, you know, that sort of thing. And I thought, well, I know where I get my crab at nature for now.
I'm glad you said that rather than us having to.
It's good to have somebody to blame, John. That's good.
I know.
I need an excuse like that as well.
Okay. I was struck by reading both of your books that the family structures in those days seemed to be much more fluid than they are now. And both you, Simon, and you, John, at different times were being brought up by family members other than your parents, and were at different times separated from your siblings. Could you each in turn tell us a little about that? You start us off, Simon.
Sure. I touch on it at the start of the 10%, but I wanted to keep it light and keep it about the police, really. But it's joined together with those biography sections of 3 or 4 pages. And I suppose it starts off there, Sandy, taking us back into the 60s. And I thought at the time it was maybe my family was dysfunctional, but pretty much a lot of them were. And it's very topical just now on the news about women who became pregnant and weren't married in those days. Yeah. And what a scandal it was. What an absolute nightmare. And babies were taken from the mothers. That's what's on news just now. They're only now being reconciled 50 and 60 years later. And women were sent away. They were sent away to Ireland. They were put in institutions because they were thought to be something wrong with them. And being a single mother was a no-no. So I was brought up with an uncle, Uncle Billy, who was a rascal. He was never out of jail, actually. And he used to stay in our house and do the meter in our house occasionally when he got out. That's how you knew he was out. And it transpired in my 20s, I discovered that he wasn't my Uncle Billy at all. He was my half-brother. My mother had had my Uncle Billy before she was married to my dad. And my granny took him in, because to admit that to the neighbours or to anybody was an absolute no-no. So she kept him as her own and brought him up as her own. And everybody thought that he was my granny's son, late delivered. And there's things like that. When you start doing your tree, it gets a bit interesting because the DNA cuts through all of that nonsense. But you start to see that these things, these social issues of the day, had very great influence on all of our ancestors and how they were brought up.
John?
Yeah, well, I mean, chiefly the family thing with me was that the house was too small for the son and daughter to be living in once they got to a certain age. So I went and lived with my granny for a long while. And, you know, you didn't think about it, I don't think, when you were a kid. You just thought you just done what you were told. And if you were going to stay with your granny, that was it. If you tried that nowadays, the children would be having 3 lawyers at your door. No, going to sue you. You know, this sort of thing. So, yeah, and I met, you know, loads of other kids were the same, you know. They stayed with their grannies or their aunties. Nobody knew who was who. And I looked up my family tree and I gave up about 1890 when I was trying to figure out who the hell was who. You know, I couldn't figure out whether this person was my grandfather, my great-grandfather, you know, an uncle or whatever.
Or all three. Or all three.
Aye, or all three, yeah. So there's a lot of that in history. I mean, you know.
Yeah. My big brother was, as you say, John, the space in the house was the problem. And my gran and grandpa took me in. And I was brought up for the first 5 years, 6 years by my gran and grandpa. And so much so that I called my grandmum for a while and she used to go bananas. But my brother, I hope he's listening tonight, because it's not because he was older or more able to look after himself. It's because he was a moaning-faced git. He was put out round all the family. None of them could keep him for more than 6 months or so. So in consequence, he went to 10 different schools before he went to secondary school.
Great. I hope your brother's no watching, actually.
Yes, I think we can move on.
Yeah.
So writing memoirs, this can be asked to both John and Simon, requires a lot of memory in the sense that you have to remember how things happen and try to reconstruct the past. And I was wondering if you did it, like, did you have any aids while reconstructing the past in the form of maybe friends and documents? And
the one thing I would say is that I thought I would have in my family, but I quickly stopped. I sent them the first couple of chapters that I'd written, and the stuff I got back was an absolute nightmare. So I never used them again for any purpose whatsoever. So something that I found really useful, John, I did a glossary to the 10%, and it's a bit of fun at the end. It's a bit of Glaswegian translated, because the book now is selling in Australia and Canada and whatnot. But the language of the day triggers so much. I'm on a Facebook thing just now, Old Glasgow Tune, and some of the things that people come away with. I got more likes and acknowledgement for one phrase that I put on the other day. See if anybody can, we maybe get this on the chat, Sandy. I put that I'd got a Saurian when I tumbled my Wilkies.
Right.
And I got over 200 responses to that, people with different translations, different spellings, different stories about what had happened to them. So the Glaswegian language of my mum and dad, people nowadays wouldn't understand them talking.
No, that's true. There's a lot of that. Tumbling out of Wilkies is the idea of rolling round a bit, you know, coming up, back up on your feet. It was a sporting thing in Glasgow many years ago. Especially among drunks.
And Stanley Baxter did it brilliantly, didn't he? When he used to bring all the words together. That language had a name. He gave it a name, didn't he? So that's the answer to your question, Emanuela, that things like music, football, politics, these things, when you think back to when you were a youngster, that's what triggers all the memories and all the stories and and the language as well.
Yeah, that makes sense, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I never threw anything out at any stage, you know. So the letters I got for people and whatever, I kept them. So I really had a multitude of stuff to look at and then try and piece it together. So it was relatively easy, you know, for me. But then again, we all experience it differently.
I thought it was easy till I sent it to Ringwood.
Well, no comment.
No comment, no comment. We'll move swiftly on, Simon. It's obvious from your book that you've been obsessed with football and it's been an important part of your life from early childhood. Can you tell us what it was like being a child obsessed with football in terms of street football and jackets as goalposts and all these things? Are they true?
Totally. You know, it's interesting, Sandy, that it's only in the last couple of days that I've been thinking about this, because I'm still obsessed with football. I've been at football every day for the last week, walking football, albeit, and I coach it now, and I'm just still football daft, as my mommy would have said. But I think it was a form of escape as a wee boy, because life, John was talking about this there, about this image that we were fed about the glorious 40s, 50s, absolute nonsense. Glasgow was a very, very violent place. That's how I remember it. I remember the pubs, Friday nights, getting bricks thrown through our window in Postle, fighting, weapons. I remember all of that going on around about me. And the fact that when I wanted a football strip, I wasn't allowed a Rangers or a Celtic top, because that would have been absolute invitation for trouble. And that's how I became a Partick Thistle fan for my sins. What a curse. But Glasgow was it was a rough place, because it was full of working men in the shipyards and the car works and the coal, the railways. And it was a very, the tenements had a structure to them where there's a tenement block and it would have a wee shop in the corner, a pub on a corner, and a bookies. And you basically had that on 2 of the 4 corners, and that was your community. In those days, women wouldn't go in a pub without a man. That would be unheard of. And they wouldn't go in a public bar. That was a domain of the men only, as far as I remember as a wee boy. And I had to go and collect my wages from my granddad when I was about 7 or 8 years of age in Possil, because he would go to the bookies or go to Shawfield where the dogs were, or go to the pub, and he'd be skint by Saturday morning. So it's
I remember the thing about the women in pubs. I mean, you know, when women started getting into pubs, I suppose you remember they used to have a wee bit called the saloon bar.
Yes.
Women, you'd go in and buy a carry-out. But when they started, loads of pubs had to get women's toilets built into them before they could get their licenses renewed. You know.
That's right, John. They had a wee carry-out
place,
off, just that 2 or 3 people could get in. That was so that women could go in and get a bottle or a can of beer for their man.
Yeah. And your background views on Glasgow are much the same as me when it comes to the violence thing. I mean, I wrote, I recall Glasgow's a violent city, most of it fueled by alcohol. And I said that a trip through Glasgow town centre at lunchtime in the City's Fair Friday was just drunks all over the place, and everybody was wanting to fight with somebody.
Yeah.
Oh, and it wasn't it wasn't a volunteer place. I don't know where they lived, these people that wrote that stuff. I think they must have lived in the outskirts somewhere.
See what you're talking about. That instinct, most people never get to use that, I suppose, or very rarely. It became part of my makeup in the police when I went into undercover, was that I could smell danger. I could sniff it out a mile away. I could walk in somewhere and say, no, let's get out of here, or watch him. And I didn't know I had that gift. It wasn't a superpower that I'd been given. It was learned on the streets of Glasgow as a young boy.
It's learned behaviour, really. It's learned behaviour. It's what you get. You're surrounded by it when you're young. I mean, at school, the teachers beat you up with a belt.
Yeah.
You know, and the police know you, of course, but they didn't think twice of kicking you in the arse.
I don't believe that.
And your parents stumped you all the time when you've done something. So it was a constant violent society we lived in, and
especially for children. Children were just battered. It was seen. Do you remember Be Seen and Not Heard? That was your place.
Oh, aye, absolutely. I mean, my uncle Hughie was a man I went out with regular. He drove a wee van and deliveries, and he used to take me away. And he died. He was 25-year-old and he died. And nobody told me. For weeks I was looking, where's my Uncle Hughie? He's not coming in for me this thing. Maybe he's away on holiday. And, I mean, I was about 10 or 11-year-old. Nobody told us.
My mum went into hospital when I must have been 7. And I had no idea why. It was none of my business. She didn't ask questions, really, because you were never going to get an answer. And she came back with my wee sister. That was the first I'd known that was going to occur. I nearly stopped playing football. That's how big a shock I got in the back garden.
Yes, John, I think you already touched on this, but maybe you have some more thoughts. So though you loved reading in libraries when you were growing up, you really disliked school as an environment. And in fact, in your memoir, you state that I certainly never understood the use of physical violence as a learning tool. Every time I got the bell to reinforce my view that school was simply a place where adults could assault children with impunity. However, in your 40s, you also sat your hires and you went to university to study law. So could you elaborate on your educational experiences, both as a child and as a mature student?
Well, I think the thing that covers this is freedom of choice. When I was sent to school, everybody else at 5-year-old, it wasn't my choice to go there. I had other places I could have went to. And I had no choice on what the reading material was. I was given it whether I liked it or no, and I never understood things like Jane Eyre and that sort of middle class tripe, as I call it. But then again, it's an opinion. But when I was in my 40s and I'd worked for, 25 years, and then I thought maybe education had something to offer. And I chose to go to university, and I chose to read the subject matters that I wanted to read. So that's the main difference between the two. My mother was taken before the school board, as they call them, in numerous occasions for me dodging school, playing truant, as they have it. I absolutely hated him, and I never saw why teachers were allowed to assault children with a physical leather weapon. And what I mentioned, I think, the other day to Sandy was that they abolished capital punishment for convicted murderers before they abolished corporal punishment in the schools. 1965, the abolition of the death penalty came in. It was 1982 before they decided that hitting children with a leather strap was against their human rights and abolished it. So, yeah, it was a violent place everywhere you looked. And Simon's point about spotting where you shouldn't be is a good one. And I've got the very same thing myself. I can go into a pub and say, I'm not happy in here. Poof, I'm out of here. Yeah. And other environments. And I think that's just what we learned as children.
Are you like Sandy? You can do that when it's your round.
Oh, absolutely, aye. Aye, that's the experience coming in there,
And John, we did do away with the birch, of course. That was progress.
Aye, well, the Isle of Man didn't do away with that to the 60s, wasn't it? They still were there in the 60s, which I'm sure delighted the Isle of Man police force.
Okay, can you tell us a little, sort of growing up, how the notion of sectarianism is a major part of Scotland expressed itself to you, and how that involved you?
Who are you talking to?
Simon.
Oh. It's very complicated, Sandy. Trust you. Have you read my book?
I have. That's why I'm asking you the question.
As I said, I was brought up with my granny, and my father was Edward Weir, and he'd been at Lisbon and all the rest of it. He was Celtic through and through. I think in the book I say that he was so Irish as only you can be if you've never actually set foot on the island. So you get the idea. And he was out the scene while I was a wee boy living with my granny, who was the absolute opposite. She was from the northeast of Scotland, and they were the absolute opposite of that. But I went to a Catholic school because my mum had obviously taken the oath to send me there. So I went to St. Teresa's, and I was only there. John, I liked school, the in-between bits, because I just kicked the ball the whole time. And school was just a focus for me to meet other players and to organise games before school, playtime, lunchtime, playtime, and after school. So the school just gave me an unlimited supply of like-minded boys. And if we had 2 bags, we had a game of football, because it's a portable game that you could throw the bag.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I did cheat a wee bit. I got done for dogging school in primary 1 for going to play football in between those times. I hadn't quite got the structure right by that time. But that Catholic school, we used to stand, St. Teresa's, we could stand up at the fence and we could see all the other mob, all the proddies going to Kippakill school in the morning. Right. And of course, it's Glasgow Sport. It's very famous Glasgow Sport. It's shouting abuse at the opposite side. They still do it today, but they've got theatres to do that in called Ibrox and Parkhead, of course. But we were practising at that young age. And then my mum went and did a really strange thing and married a Hun who demanded that I go to a Proddy school. We were just pawns in all of this, of course, weren't we?
Oh, aye, nothing to do with you.
And after the summer holidays, I found myself down below the fence, getting shouted at by my old pals upstairs. Yeah, Proddy dog. And I had to learn all the new lyrics, of course, Catholic and all that stuff. Had a whole new songbook to learn entirely at 6 years of age. Very tricky. And that's hence the Partick Thistle strip. And when I started raising money for charity, when I had my daughter alive, who was very ill with cystic fibrosis, I could swing both ways. I had a Celtic tie if I was in the East End at a supporters club or something, and I had a Rangers tie that I could wear if I was in Govan or wherever I was raising money. So you learn to be very two-faced and possible, trying to stay alive.
On the subject of sectarianism, do you remember Lex McClean?
Yes, very well, yeah.
Well, Lex McClean, I've written it down here. He had a story, I think, that just sort of outlined sectarianism, and he told it in the Rangers Club at Ibrox one night. And he said he got a letter from a young man looking for advice. And the young man says to him, I'm 32 years old and I have 2 brothers and a sister. My brother's a Rangers supporter and my sister is a prostitute with a site in Glasgow Square. And my father's living off her immoral earnings. And he won't marry my mother because she's pregnant to the neighbour next door. And he says, now I've met this lovely lassie and I think we want to get married. Should I tell her about my brother who's a Rangers supporter? So it's okay to have a brother who's an arsonist, a sister who's a prostitute, a mother who's pregnant to somebody else, but it's no good to be a Rangers supporter, you know. And so sectarianism, it was brought up there. I told my family that my wife was a Catholic when she wasn't. Well, she wasn't my wife at the time, she was my girlfriend. And I was asked, you seem to be seeing a lot of this particular girl. I said, aye. And of course, Janet had lovely red hair. And they were at the usual, what school did she go to, you know, that stuff. Yeah. And I said, it doesn't matter. I says, why don't you ask me what her religion is instead of this nonsense? Ask me what school she went to. I said, she's a Catholic. And all of a sudden, people were different with her.
Yeah.
But they were absolutely different with her. And Janet didn't know I'd done this. And it wasn't until my sister's night before her wedding that Maggie came out and spoke to me, and she says, she said something, and I says, look, Janet's not a Catholic, Janet's a Protestant. Right. I told you she was a Catholic just to point out the absolute bigotry and what yous are really like. This is terrible, this nonsense, you know. And that didn't get down too well. Never went down too well with Janet when she found out. And she says she wondered why people were starting to change towards her.
Yeah.
And I says, well, that just shows you that, you know,
they're narrow-minded.
They're narrow-minded, and they're just going with, you know, somebody else's feelings. They don't have feelings of their own, you know. They're following a crowd of bigots, basically.
And people don't realise.
Okay, I know the pair of you could talk about the general issues from the bad old days, good old days all night, but can we move you on to 1 or 2 specific questions about your book and themes from the book? I'll start with Simon and then you can take John, Emanuela. The obvious first question for you, Simon, is to tell us how the streetwise cool kid that you obviously were ended up joining the police. How and why did that happen?
I suppose it's like everything in life, Sandy, it's those closing doors, you know, the sliding doors they talk about. I was talking with somebody about that today, and it's just amazing. In fact, it was my cousin Peter we were talking about. There's wee incidences on your family tree that are just so per chance. And that's why you're here at all, you know. And I suppose that's a wee bit about me joining the police. It was just a coming together of events. I was in Yarrows. I was an apprentice electrician in Yarrows, doing my HNC. My career was all mapped out. I'm hopeless anyway. If anybody wants a plug fixed or anything, don't lift the phone to me, okay? Because I don't do that anymore. I was that bad. But I had an accident playing football. I get injured playing football, ended up with a bad knee and in the hospital a couple of times. By the time I came out, they told me I couldn't keep doing my HNC because I'd lost too much time. I couldn't do my ONC. I was going to be pulling cables. So I was disgruntled. I was living in a flat in Woodside with my pal Stan. And at that particular time, I was driving a motorbike. I was playing in a band. The police was never on the horizon as far as my family or friends were concerned. When I've asked them since, they've said, well, we thought the police might be involved in your life, but not in the way that it became involved. And I was passing Pitt Street on my bike one day, and Radio Clyde, this is 1977, Radio Clyde were advertising like mad for the police. They had just been given a big pay award because the Tory government were just about to come in under Maggie Thatcher, and they were boosting the police force to fight the battles that were still to come with the miners and all the rest of it. So they were recruiting like mad. And I heard the advert. I was passing Pitt Street, remembered, and went in for a laugh because I was soaking wet on my motorbike, hair down here, and the rest is history, as they say. And I think part of that was going home and telling my parents and family that I was joining the police. The reaction I got spurred me on because they all laughed in my face. You know, they were like, very funny, very funny. That'll be right. Get your tea.
Okay, sorry to break the mood and ask a serious question, but you started to touch on it there, that the police service that you joined in the late 70s was ending, being one kind of police service and was starting to turn into another one, a different kind of police service. Tell us a little about the conflict between the old and the new and some of the changes, and which side were you on?
Well, that's very interesting, Sandy, because it's happening again now with Police Scotland. It's happened in the last 5 or 10 years with Police Scotland. I don't recognise the uniform. I don't recognise the attitude. I don't recognise anything about the police now because it's changed again. But the change you're talking about was from post-war, when all the guys came back from the Second World War, had to do something, and a lot of them joined the police. The Highlands had no employment at all. A lot of them came down and joined the police, the old tutors. And the measure to be a policeman, the standard in those days was that you were 6'6" and built like a shit brick house. That was really all that mattered. Some of them were illiterate. Some of them hadn't spoke English until they came to Glasgow. They were Gaelic speaking. None of that was important. You just had to be a physical presence about you because of what John was saying about violence ruled the streets. And the police had to be just as violent, John, to match that up, because you can't cower away from it, that's for sure. So when I joined, these guys were all sergeants and some of them were inspectors. They were the backbone of the Glasgow police that it had been until 1977. And the county police, Argyll and Bute, and the Edinburgh police and the Renfrew and Bute police, these were all individual forces in their own right, with their own chief constable. And the Glasgow police were renowned. They were absolutely ruthless. It was an iron fist in Glasgow. And that's what we were joining, the remnants of that. And we were Strathclyde police. We had an education, generally. In fact, exclusively, there was now standards. We were attracting university students because the wages were increased so much. Up until 1977, the police were amongst the poorest in the country. They were 30 to 40% behind the national average wage. So policemen up until then relied on their communities to feed them, really, to feed them and their families. They needed the wee fish parcel, they needed the wee dram at the back, they needed a wee helping hand here and there from the community that they were policing, which worked perfectly well. But that all changed when Strathclyde Police came in.
One of my students, when I was teaching adult basic education people, was a former Glasgow policeman from the Highlands. And he couldn't read or write very well. I had him for all-grade English and all-grade arithmetic. But he had a fascinating story. He'd been sunk in the Navy during the war, and he was a submarine, and he would get taken to Murmansk in Russia in the hospital, brought back, and he told me that in the journey back to Greenock, he was absolutely terrified he was going to get torpedoed again. But he told me about the 1980 something when Russia started opening up, and the Russians accepted the convoys, British convoys, contribution during the war, that he was being given a medal. And he went up to the Russian embassy in Glasgow. Was it Park Circus it was in?
Yeah.
He went up there to get the medal. And he says to me, and clever enough as you are, he says, you won't know what it says. And I says, it's no bloody Russian, is it? And he says, aye. I says, bring it in and show me it. So he brought it in to me the next week and he showed me it. And I took a copy of it and I went up to Glasgow University, the Russian department, and asked the guy what it said. So he told me it was saying about the great patriotic warrior's contribution and all this. So I says to him, see, when you were at that presentation, there were Russians there, weren't there? Yeah, yes, yes. I said, well, what do you know ask one for? He says, I didn't like to. And I thought, how humble can you get? Here's a man that sailed across the ocean, been torpedoed, trying to get supplies to the Russians, but he doesn't want to trouble them, 30 or 40 years later by asking them to translate a small bit of Russian. You don't really get more humble than that, I don't think.
No, for sure. Some of these stories, and all these guys were reluctant to talk about these things because they weren't glorified in their heads, that's for sure. They'd seen friends killed, they'd seen... You imagine if he was sunk, how many died on that incident? It was... And it's glorified now, and people talk about it as if it's got some glamour to it, John.
Aye.
That's part of the problem. But that's a different topic.
I'm sure that's why my grandfather never spoke much about anything. When I read where he'd been in, I thought, oh God, how can you survive that? Really, there's nothing glorious in it.
A lot of men were shot for being traitors. They were actually shell-shocked. They were actually numb with what they'd seen and what they had been made to do and how they'd lived in these trenches.
Yeah, they were mentally ill.
Yes, totally. So that was a nice cheery topic, Sandy. Well done.
Absolutely, well done.
I'll pass on to Emanuela then.
Yes, so we'll talk about employment a little bit, John, because it is at the heart of your memoir, given your impressive working history as a barman, bar manager, truck driver, journalist, BBC radio helpline worker, and writer and teacher, among many other roles. So do you think this high variety in terms of your employment history has shaped your character and your perspective on life and various maybe career paths?
I've had something like 37, 38 full-time jobs, a variety of part-time jobs. And I've met literally hundreds of people, if no thousands, over the years. I mean, some I liked, some I didn't like, and some I couldn't stand, especially employers. But it's got to form your character in one way or another, you know what I mean? And but I'm no one for indulging in self-analysis and trying to work out what I'm like and what I'm not like, and what I am. You know, young people keep using this expression that they went somewhere to find themselves, you know, like they went abroad to find themselves. And, you know, and you think, what the fuck are you talking about? You know, you are what you are, you know, and you can't make everybody like you. You know, so some people are not going to like you, and that's just a fact of life, you know. It's because they're bad judges of characters, the way I put it. I don't subscribe to the idea of trying to analyse who I am or what I am. I'll leave that to other people. It's up to them to decide whether they think I'm good or bad or indifferent, you know. So yeah, but you can't run away from your past or the people that was round about you when you were growing up. So it's a lot of what you are learned behaviour for when you were a child, basically. I think so. You grow up as whatever you are, and the hell with it, you know. What can you do? Absolutely.
Let's maybe approach the employment area from a different perspective then, from the perspective of nowadays job market that you have described, not a job market, but as a slave market in your memoir. And in your opinion, what has been lost?
I think that really bothers me and bothers me personally as well was that in my early working career, you could choose what you wanted to work at, you know. You decided whether you wanted to be an apprentice plumber or whatever, and the market offered these jobs to people. Now you can be the smartest kid in the block with a university degree, but if you can't get a job, the Department of Work and Pensions is going to tell you to take a job. You know, here it's here, go and take it. And so contracts, as Simon will know quite well, are supposed to be two-sided things, you know. You're supposed to be at equal arm's length with whoever you're entering into an agreement with. You're supposed to have some rights, but when it comes to employment rights, no, take that job or we'll cut your benefit, or take that job or leave it and pay the consequences, you know. I mean, the 0 hours contracts, that is a joke, right? Absolute joke. It's not a contract at all. It's a slave agreement, you know, that you'll just do what you're told whenever you're told. I think people in the cotton fields in the American 1800s had more working conditions than that. And but the amusing side of it is Kevin Bridges. He says that there was a big pound shop franchise was taking people on and no paying them at all. And when they were asked about it, they said that it gave people some self-esteem. Yeah. And Kevin Bridges says their self-esteem couldn't have been that high when everything in the shop was worth £1 apart from them. You know, so I don't buy into these modern day double talk with the government, no matter what persuasion you are, about 0 hour contracts and employment rights. And I think you will see a lot of employment rights vanishing now we're not governed by Europe anymore. But then again, that's another story.
There was another side to that as well, John, what you're saying, that when I was 15, coming on 16 at school, I had no choice about going to work or not. My mother made it perfectly clear that getting a trade was the only thing that mattered. And employment was up above everything else. It was above family, it was above religion, it was above breathing. Being in employment was the only thing that everything else stemmed from that, having money in your pocket.
Yeah, you had to get a job. It was as simple as that. They were planning you to get a job when you were about 10. You know, like
I came home and discovered that I had an interview in Yarrows. And she took me down and put me in the door. But you're right, I had a choice of apprenticeship. I got a wee shot at everything at the welding. That was funny, and all the different bits and bobs. I'd have been quite happy painting the ships, but I ended up being a spark. But Billy Connolly said in those days that the school gates opened, and the shipyard gates and the car works and the metal works all opened, and everybody poured across the gap in between, and everybody got an apprenticeship and a job that was going to stand them in good stead for the rest of their life. But that culture is gone now because all that industry has gone.
Yeah. I mean, I recall the first paid job I had was I was 8. I worked for the local coalman, Sandy Lang in Anderson, and I folded all the coal bags, and I had a job of taking a wee bit of coal out of each of them to make up a couple of bags for the men for their beer money. Yeah. And I fed the horse and stuff like that, and I went out collecting the tick, and a Friday and Saturday night along with the coalman. So I get paid for that, which was great, you know. I think I was paid more than my father was at the time. But, yeah, but I often thought about our school. Finison Street Primary School, I viewed as a feeder system for the shipyards and the railways and the mines and everything else. I don't think there was many people come out of Woodside School and went on to become a doctor or an accountant or a lawyer or went to university. I think I went to university, but there was a 30-year gap. Right? So yeah, so I don't think the schooling, but you're dead right about the family. You had to get work. That was it. You know, you were disowned if you didn't get a job. Yeah. And if I was good at anything, it was getting jobs. I managed to get 37 or 40 jobs a month.
Unlike that pattern, Simon, you spend most of your adult working life within the one service, and your book is jam-packed full of tales about your work. Some of them are horrific, some of them are hilarious, some of them are instructive. Most of them are all three. Do you want to give us a sampler of a couple of stories that will make people hunt for the book so that they can get more?
No. And some of
Well,
them
you're not getting a choice. Tell us two good
and some
stories.
of them are true, Sandy.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing like the truth.
I thought you would feed me in a wee bit better than that and give me a clue what you wanted me, what sort of topic you wanted to talk about. But I suppose
McCartney, first of all.
Oh, well. Oh, what happened there? Can you still see me?
Yep. Unfortunately, yes.
Yes, because my screen went blank there. McCartney was good because it was very early in my service. So I get away with this one because I was so young. I suppose I was about 24, 25. And as everyone of a certain era will know, McCartney had a place down in the Mulligan-Tyre where he wrote the Mulligan-Tyre song, recorded it, and he had a farm down there, him and Linda and the kids. And me being 23, 24, I was an aide to the CID. I had just been put a suit on and been given my aideship to the CID. They used to come down every summer and spend their summer at the farm down in Kintyre, which is about 3 or 4 miles outside Campbelltown. And everybody knew this. And so it was the July show, which is held in August every year in Campbelltown. I know, don't ask. And I thought this is the perfect excuse to go and meet him, because John Lennon had been killed just before that, maybe 6 months before that. John had been killed in New York. So I thought, I'm a police, so I'll go up and see Paul and say, it's a security thing, big man. We need to know what you're up to and all that so that we can keep you safe. Just the biggest lot of shite you could ever imagine, but a good excuse in my head to go and meet the man. So I did that. And eventually I got through the cordons of security, the armed guys that he had. I just brass-necked it and drew up outside his farmhouse. And sure enough, Linda came out. John, you'll remember, Sandy, you'll remember. I know that Emanuela won't, but anybody over about our age will remember the bad press that Linda McCartney had. They hated her.
Yep.
And she was so protective of Paul and so defensive of Paul. People think she married him for him. She had more money than he ever could have made. And that's the truth of the matter, with the family with Kodak and all that behind her. But she came out and said yes. And I just wilted in front of her. Here's this woman, world famous woman, with her arms folded, looking at me like the wee boy that I am and asking, what do you want? And I brought my warrant card out, my hand shaking like that. And that just made her worse, because I said, I'm the CID. And she said, and because he had been done for possession of possession or something like that. So I just got her hackles up there and then. And immediately, red-faced, detective or no detective, I knew when I was beat. So I just sort of mumbled, it was just about tomorrow, your arrangements, but I'll just go now. And I was ready to go back in the car when she wilted, because I think she had kids of her own. She wasn't a dafty. She must have realised right away, this guy's just wanting to meet Paul, you know. And she said, do you want to come in for a cup of tea and meet Paul? So she took me in by the hand almost, you know, and led me into the kitchen. So I sat in the kitchen for about half an hour, and Paul was there telling stories. But I was the celebrity, Sandy. It was having a stranger in the house where all the kids came to see me. Having a policeman in the house was a big deal, because they probably never got to meet anybody, hardly ever, certainly strangers. So they were asking me about the police, and Paul was telling stories about having a jag in Liverpool and when he was 17 and getting stopped at every corner by the police. He gave me a tour of the recording studio and all that. It's going really well, but you need to buy the book to get the whole story, because there's a lot more stuff.
That's a good place to stop that. Can I ask you one last question about the book then? The latter half of your police career you spent as a foot soldier in the war against drugs, much of it undercover. Without telling us or tell us whatever you like, but share with us the conclusions that you came to about that and where that's taken you nowadays.
Okay, well, I'll tell you a quick story about my first undercover job in Oban. Yeah?
Yes.
I'll tell you it very quickly. It was a pub called the Man Trap in Oban, and this is the early 80s. So drugs were quite a new thing, certainly to the police, to the hierarchy in the police. They couldn't spell drugs in those days. But me and another guy, Tam from Dumbarton, were to go to Oban and go into a pub, and we were electricians. We designed this very cleverly because I knew what an electrician looked like. And we were to go into this pub for a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and on the Friday we were going to call the troops in if there were any drugs on sale. The place was absolutely hoaching with every kind of substance you could imagine, acid, and sulf and everything. But the first night, Tam and I didn't know about the licensing laws in Argyll. We thought it was like Glasgow with a 10 o'clock shut, but we were actually there till 1 in the morning, and we had misjudged. You know how you try and pace yourself for the night? Well, we had misjudged it drastically, and we ended up fighting. About 12:30, him and I had the cues at each other and tried to punch and really fighting, which was fantastic undercover work. We never realised how good we were until then. Because when we went in the next day, we were kind of celebrities. We weren't barred, we managed to apologise, and everybody thought we were the bee's knees until the Friday night when the troops came in and raided the joint. And all I remember is one of the drug dealers in Oban, we thought he was going to be upset at us and just looking at me and saying, I don't know what the world's coming to when the police are recruiting guys like you. So I was a natural, Sandy. But from that, from enforcing the drug laws, and funnily enough, that was the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 that we were enforcing at that time. And that was born a year on Friday coming, 50 years on Friday, the 18th of June 1971, President Nixon declared the war on drugs. And really that was a war on the blacks, it was a war on the hippies, it was a war on the peace movement, it was a war on anyone that the American government saw as a danger to what they were doing. But that's another story entirely. So since leaving the police and writing the book and getting involved with some people through the book, I have joined LEAP, the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And what we strongly believe is that the Misuse of Drugs Act is a war on drugs and a war on poverty and a war on marginalised people across the globe, and an excuse to stigmatise people and use the law inappropriately, and that it's actually a gross health issue across the globe. And we want to see it decriminalised, we want to see it regulated properly, and we want to see people that are victims of that drug war, who are all the drug users and people who are dependent on drugs now. Interestingly, only 10% of people who use drugs become problematic with it. And that's because of the background and because of the circumstances they find themselves in. So I'm very much involved in that. In LEAP, we're very active. We've got the government very mobilised just now as well, especially in Scotland. And we're hopefully having an event in Holyrood. I'm friends with Peter Cricant, who provides the overdose prevention unit in Glasgow city streets. So much. We could do another show about that altogether. But I feel very strongly that it's time the Misuse of Drugs Act was taken away.
Okay, thanks.
Well, John, returning back to the celebrity encounters bit, I want you to tell us some stories about your celebrity encounters in the book, because there are many, and maybe when you sent Eartha Kitt flying, or when you almost met Tony Bennett, or when you encountered Fred Ram.
Well, I worked in Glasgow City Centre on Hope Street, and I used to go to George Young's coffee bar for my lunch with my pal, and that was in Redhill Street. And one day we were in there, and some of the Rangers players were there, so we were talking to them. I was 15, 16 at the time. And we, as usual, we kept talking, and we were going to be late back, so I ran down the stairs. I ran into Renfield Street, and I ran into a woman that was wearing a fancy fur coat and, you know, all sorts of jewellery. And anyway, when I got myself away from her, I looked at her, and she was a black woman. And I thought, that's Eartha Kitt. You know, she was a great American singing star in the days. And it was her. She'd been appearing in the Empire. And she wasn't half pleased at all. I mean, she was just not pleased. No matter how much I apologised, she, you know, I don't know what she thought, but I knocked her flying, and I lived off it for a couple of weeks telling my pals up in Locarno. And then when I worked for the BBC, I was down in London, and I was down there for a week at a consumer conference, But I had a meeting with the BBC Radio 2 in the Friday afternoon, and my colleague was coming down on the Thursday night. So she phoned me at my hotel and we met up and went to an Italian restaurant for something to eat. And we were sitting and she says to me, I went up there today, you know, meaning Radio 2. I says, well, I thought you would, but I don't know why. The meeting's not tomorrow. But she says, you're not going to like this story when I tell you. I says, well, don't tell me, you know. But she insisted. And what had happened is she'd been up to Radio 2 to see the producer and stuff for the Jimmy Young programme. And Tony Bennett was sitting in the green room. You know, he was getting interviewed about being at Glastonbury. And I thought, why did you not pick up the phone? You know, I mean, all she had to do was phone my mobile and say, Tony Bennett's here, get her. And I'd have been in a taxi, went in there, and because I'm part of the BBC at that time, walk into the green room and say, how's it going, Tony? What are you doing? No. No. So what made it worse, actually, was that about 3 weeks before, I'd taped about 5 or 6 Tony Benn albums for her, you know, because she liked him singing. But she never told me. I've never forgiven her for that, you know. But the last one I'll mention is one that got me into trouble with my wife. We were sitting in a pub one night having a drink with some pals, and one of them says to me, what's the best thing you've ever done or met or whatever, you know? And I says, oh, there's no doubt about that. Red rum. I says, I met red rum. So my wife said, you met red rum? I says, you know about it? She says, oh, I know about it. But I'd have thought that became second best to your marriage or you're having children or something like that. I says, oh, you know, so it took me ages to get out of that one. But I was down in Southport in England, and red rum used to train along the Southport sands. You remember that was always in the papers. And it was pouring a rain, and I seen this car park attendant coming towards me. And I thought, I hope he's not looking for money, you know what I mean? There's not a car anywhere. But it turns out he wasn't. And I invited him in with the rain, and I made him a cup of tea. We had my wee stove at the time in a lorry. And so we got talking about red rum and training in the beach and the Grand National ones and things. And he says, why don't you go along and see the stable? It's just along the road there at Birkdale. So I went along there and I recognised him when I turned the corner right away, the wee level crossing in the car showroom. So I looked in the car showroom and the walls was all full of photos of red rum. So I went in and asked the guy if I could have a look at them. And he said, sure. He says, but would you not rather see the real thing? So I was flabbergasted, you know, and he said, a horse box drew up and he said, there's this horse box, so it's still running at the stables. He says, Billy will take you round. So Billy Blackstock, his name was, he was Red Rum's stable boy. He took me around to show me the horse. And I met Red Rum, and the stable was just an old stable. The door was hanging off at one bit and there was holes in it. And I says to him, I wasn't expecting, I was expecting something kind of different. And he says to me, it's a horse. That's where horses stay, in places like this. What did you expect? You think you're going to be sitting back in an armchair smoking a big cigar? And I felt there. But it's a great memory, and it was a brilliant animal. I mean, and what surprised me about it was quite small. If you've been around national race horses or jump horses, show jumping horses, they're very, very big animals. But Red Rum was pretty small. And how it got out of the fences in the national, I have no idea. And it won as a 2-year-old on the flat 5 furlongs, so that's incredible. He won a 5 furlong sprint, and then years later won 3 Grand National.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
now we're on sporting memories. Emanuela, Simon, you want to introduce Jim is going to share something with us?
Yeah, sure. I met Jim through Walking Football, although I was aware of him prior to that, and I was especially aware of the work that he does and the charity that he represents. Is he with us? Yes, there he is.
Yes.
So,
hi, folks.
Sporting Memories Foundation of Scotland, and I've come across Jim's work in different guises, working with Alzheimer's, working with all sorts of organisations, and through Walking Football Scotland, which is designed primarily to get old guys like me back active again, physically and mentally. And that's something that Jim's foundation are experts at. So welcome aboard, Jim. Thanks for coming on.
Well, I must say, I've really enjoyed what I've heard today. I doubt I'll be able to entertain you all as well as those who have already participated.
Well, you're not brought on for that purpose, Jim. You're the serious note today.
Serious note, right? No, but I love part of a lot of what we do. I love doing it. I mean, I'm very lucky. Hopefully, my boss is not listening, but I feel privileged to do what I'm doing, and I would almost go as far as to say I might, breaching all employment laws, John, almost do it for nothing. Not quite, but no, we're a national organisation, but the Sporting Memories Foundation Scotland is the kind of Scottish arm of it. We have 40 odd groups throughout the country, mainly in the Central Belt, where guys, mainly guys, but not exclusively, living with dementia, and the buzzwords at the moment, which we were addressing long before COVID, social isolation and loneliness and depression, are encouraged to meet and chat about sport and have quizzes and a wee bit of low-level physical activity as a means really of getting some companionship, some banter, some socialization is the fancy word for it. But it really means like what we do at the Walking Football, Simon. And I heard you the other day on the radio saying that possibly the most important part of it is the cup of tea afterwards and the chat. Yeah. For guys like our goalkeeper and so on, you know, that maybe doesn't get out very often. And it's a big part, it becomes a big part of these guys' lives. Yeah. Also for the carers are so underappreciated, the wives and partners and unpaid carers that just kind of battle on in a way that's probably grown, John and Simon, from the kind of people that the age group that they are, that the way they were brought up just to kind of get on with it. So they get a wee break. We've been we've been very, very fortunate in holding on to all of our volunteers and recruiting quite a few new ones over the last 15 months, where other charities have really struggled. But we depend heavily on the volunteers who in normal times are facilitating groups, they're organising things, and during the lockdown, we worked quite quickly to get onto Zoom and to have telephone lines and so on set up, but we're still not reaching all of the guys that we did before, although in fact we're reaching some people that we didn't reach before because they're housebound and have managed to get set up on Zoom. So we're kind of making sticks for our own back, because we've now realised we need to continue the Zoom thing to keep those new people that we've engaged, but also try to hopefully in the foreseeable get back to doing what we originally were set up to do, which is meet face to face on a weekly basis.
Do you think sport and football in particular, Jim, here in the west of Scotland is a great, I personally think it's a great forum. We used to take cards along to the Walking Football sessions, playing cards with Billy Bremner, Jinky Johnson, John Gregg, whoever, even further back, that John will remember that I don't. And Sandy, he'll go even further back than that. But we used to bring the cards along, and over the tea or a coffee, the cards would just be lying. And that was the stimulus for the conversation. And it's using your brain like that and talking about these things, I find, is very therapeutic for guys.
We've got all sorts of resources, Simon. We've got sets of cards for all sorts of sports, Scottish and football legends, cricketers, golfers, you name it. When I started volunteering before I did this as a job, I've got I've got boxes, and this is why you can't see my floor, or indeed my wife's face when I brought another cardboard box full of books in today. I've got books, photographs, you know, the Scottish football book. Remember Hugh Taylor's Scottish football book? Well, I had, a bit like John, I'd kept all of these things unbeknownst to some people in the loft and so on. I was told repeatedly, why do you keep all that rubbish? You know, get rid of it, make some space. And I honestly said, you never know, they might come in handy one day. And before, for years, I didn't look at them, to be perfectly honest with you. And in the last 5 years, they've been an absolute, you know, gold mine of stuff. Recognising football grounds from the guys who could recognise football grounds from the picture, not from the subtitle that tells them it's Somerset Park, but they know the look of that stand, or the recognition thing for guys. They say that music is probably the most stimulating thing for people living with dementia. They get the tune, and then they can the words come easier after they've got the tune. Yeah. But it's said that second to that, sport, and as I was explaining to you earlier, it's not a sexist thing at all, but the two guys who founded the organisation 10 years ago realised that a lot of men were, unless members of golf clubs or bowls clubs or whatever, disinclined to go to the coffee morning or to because it was thought to be, or the bingo, because it was women's things. Yeah. And we're looking for a means of trying to engage men. And it was considered by a generation, which we are all in this room, apart from Emanuela, part of, manly enough, if you know what I mean, to be thought to be engaging in discussions about sport. And in the west of Scotland, as you know, because I'm as football mad as you, it's generally football. It's top of the tree. Yeah. Although in Scotland, it's amazing how many great sportsmen we've had and have who are nothing to do with football, like Andy Murray and Chris Hoy, and there's all these sports that we never really hear all that much about. But
I think you just went through the whole list there, Ryan.
I know.
I remember Wilkie. Remember the swimmer?
Yes.
Aye.
He acquired an American. Remember him acquiring an American accent shortly after he arrived there?
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Jim, it's interesting that you were introduced as my friend there, but that obviously stops tonight, because a week on Sunday we'll be taking part in the derby, the new derby between Giffnock and Pollock United. Mm-hmm. Football, Sunday, 11 a.m. Oh, not for the faint-hearted, I should add.
Be there or be square.
Jim, thanks very much for coming on tonight and telling us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Not at all. Sandy?
Yeah, I'm conscious we're getting pretty near the end, but Emanuela and I will maybe feed you one or two questions that have come in from the audience, and then we'll call it a day at 8:30, definitely. So this is a question to both of you from Frank White. What plans have you for further writing? Any books in mind? Simon, you want to start us?
Yeah, lots of plans. And I've started 3 or 4, but they're all rubbish. I've actually got the book in my head. I probably need to get a pint with you, Sandy, to discuss how I'm going to go about it.
You don't mean a cup of coffee?
I'll have the coffee, you have the pint, of course, the usual. But I'll be buying again, no doubt.
As usual.
But the 10% is really a look at a space and time as a rookie, getting into the police almost by accident, my obsession with football and music and the thing, and having a young family and losing my daughter and stuff like that. And then life took a serious turn because by that time I had gathered some expertise and all that experience that's recounted in the book, and I was plucked from that life into a different life entirely, which was still part of the security services for the country, but in a different vein altogether. So there's many more conflicts in there about politics and about morals and about some lines that need to be drawn, and what we do to keep us safe on a day-to-day basis that people might definitely don't appreciate, and some of the stuff that goes on at that level. So that's what my next book is going to be about. I just don't know how I'm going to shape it that way as yet.
Okay, good. John?
Well, I really think I've done as much as I want to do in the long one. You know, I've got a book with a publisher at the moment, but they've not got back to me yet. But I don't think I'll be venturing doing a novel again. I mean, I've really written 5 novels. I mean, I've only had 2 books published, but I've written 5 novels. I've written countless short stories and poetry and stuff like that. But I really feel I'm feeling it now. I'm getting too old for this bloody nonsense, so I won't be. I think my Warhol moment came when I crashed the car through the window when I was 15, and I was famous for 15 minutes. And I think that's as far as it goes.
John, you've kind of ruined my second book tonight in your first sentence tonight when you said that everybody's writing about spies, murderers, and serial killers. You kind of stole my thunder there, right?
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah.
There's another. So you go first, Emanuela.
Oh yeah, I was just about to ask another question, but okay, I'll ask mine first then. So Sean asks us, can you sketch a bit more Glasgow's music and entertainment scene, maybe in the 60s and 70s?
Oh, right. Well, Glasgow had more cinemas and more dance halls than every major town in Britain, including London at one time. And where I lived in Anderson, there was 5 dance halls within a couple hundred yards of each other. There was the Astoria, the Albert, the Locarno, the West End Ballroom, and the Berkeley. And they were all, you know, I get barred out every one of them. Yeah, and I mean, singing was a great thing for Glaswegian houses in those days. I mean, when I left the dance hall at night and walked down the road, maybe about 1 in the morning, all you heard was, I left my heart in San Francisco, coming for one day, and then, you know, the wild side of life coming for the other. And so these things were relatively cheap in the days, you know, so you could afford to go dancing 2 or 3 times a week, you know, and go to the pictures 4 or 5 times a week. I would like to try that nowadays. Glasgow was a very, it still is. I mean, there's a load of theatres as well, you know. And, we went to the Pavilion regularly, watched like McClean and the Alhambra and Jimmy Logan and the Metropole and all that. So it was a hive of entertainment in Glasgow. There was always something to do. So yeah, it was a good city to grow up in, I think.
The People's Palace in Glasgow Green has got a fantastic section. I think it's closed just now, the whole place, but they've got a section about the dancing in Glasgow because it was a worldwide phenomena. The ballroom dancing in those days, it was a big part of our culture that my mum and her sisters all spoke about. It was
got the steps in the People's Palace. They've got steps you can go and so you learn the steps that are the dancing on the floor. It's sort of luminous.
Emanuela, what your generation, without being cheeky about it, finds it hard to understand is that our entertainment was limited to no TV or maybe one channel initially that I remember was BBC One, and it finished at 11:30 at night when we had God Save the Queen, and it started again about 7 o'clock in the morning, and in between there was nothing.
I never seen a television until I was 12-year-old.
Yeah, So there was no mobile phones. There was certainly no internet or anything like that. None of that had been. If I wanted to watch football, I had a half-hour window at the weekend when it was on the telly, and we'd no way of recording it or anything. You were either there or you missed it, and it was in black and white. So we didn't know about team colours and things like that. So to try and explain that world to people who live, the changes we've had in the last 50 years are absolutely incredible.
On that point, can I bring in the very last question, and then we'll hand over to Emanuela to close up. But this is a question from Ruth. We've heard a lot about the issues that Glasgow had in the past, but is there a place or an event from that time in the city that you have the happiest memories from? Each give us a happiest memory for Ruth.
John, you're first.
Well, in 1962, I went to see Jerry Lee Lewis, the American rock star.
John, can I just interrupt you in your mind here about your red rum story? Remember, you got married and had kids.
Right, apart from getting married and having kids, I remember going to see Jerry Lee Lewis in 1962, and it was a different world then. Everybody sat down at concerts in the days. Now they all stand up. So Jerry Lee Lewis walked onto the stage, kicked the piano stool away and started singing Great Balls of Fire. So we all got up and started dancing. And a wee Glasgow councillor came on the scene and told us all to sit down. The concert wouldn't go ahead, and they put all the house lights up. So anyway, we all sat down again, and Jerry Lee Lewis repeated his actions, kicked the piano stool across the stage, started singing Great Balls of Fire. We all got up to dance, but we never got the chance to rob a line out of American Pie. The third take, right, these big 6-foot black guys came out along with Jerry Lee, and they were obviously American with the dress they had in this. And he had a word with this wee councillor, and all of a sudden he vanished. And we managed to go on with the concert.
Yeah.
But I later heard that the Glasgow Corporation, as it was, had banned Jerry Lee from St Andrews Halls because he stood on top of their grand piano where he was singing. But I don't think the ban amounted to much, because the St Andrews Hall was burned down 7 months later. You know, so I'll never forget that night. But recently, in the past 4 or 5 years, I got an email from a woman in America who said she was at the concert with me, and did I remember her? And I thought, I wasn't there with anybody. You know, I was there myself. I managed to get one ticket. So first of all, I thought it might have been my cousin. I had a cousin with the same name, and he used to give my address when he was in Locarno. You know, and he would tell me he stayed in Oak Street, and you know, that was my address. And, he later immigrated to Canada, I think, with all these women chasing him. But I just do not remember the woman, and she sent me photographs of herself in the days and up to date, and I still don't remember it. You know, I remember that night. I remember it very well, because the next morning's Daily Record had riot in St Andrews Halls pasted all over the place, you know, because we were up dancing. They called that a riot. And so, different now.
Yeah, for sure. My memory, I'm not going to pick one instance for Ruth to answer her question. There were so many, but they all have a common theme. And I think it goes along with what John was saying there, because I went to see Bowie, I went to see Uriah Heep, Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, you name it. We saw them all in Greens, and then what became the Apollo in Glasgow, which was a global, worldwide famous venue. And camping with my mates when I was 12, 13. You see, when I was 9 or 10, I had to go home after school, let myself in, get the mince browned, get the table set for dinner. We all had chores to do that nowadays you wouldn't let an 8 or 9-year-old walk home on their own, I dare say. So it's a different world that we live in now. And we had our freedoms then. And this is what worries me. See, the most memorable times, if we did the memories thing here all night, I'd be talking about times with my mates camping, fishing, my first pint down in Helensburgh when I was 15, on the street corners in Glasgow, the laughs and the times that we had and the daft things we did. Parents weren't there. Adults weren't there. Those memories were made with your mates, the first girls that you met. All those experiences were made without adult involvement because it was a safe environment, pretty much, that we were operating in. And I worry about our generations of children now who can't be allowed those freedoms because of some of the circumstances we've got round about us.
Yeah.
That caused a nice silence, didn't it?
Absolutely. I don't have no how to G out the party.
Yes, tonight has been truly lovely. We had great chats, and I'd like to say thank you to Simon, Sandy, John, Jim, and our silent host, Katie. And if you want to experience some of the great stories that we heard today, you can purchase In the Shadow of the Crane and the 10% on the Ringwood website, and they're available both as physical copies and as ebooks, so you can decide. And yeah, I hope you have a lovely rest of the evening, and bye.
Thank you, Emanuela. You did a fantastic job.
Good job.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Right, good night, folks.
Bye-bye.
Good night, time.